Marlene, thank you so much for being one of my connections and reaching out. And we can't wait to have you on the Latinos in Clinical Research because the Afro Latino, like you were saying,
Yep.
super underrepresented. We're going to get into your career, and this interview is more about you and your career and like how to make things practical for people trying to get in. But why don't you maybe start out with what you learned from the diversity summit and what your passion is now for like underserved. I mean, I'm being educated on this stuff too. Underserved group Afro Latinos in research, like that's nobody really talks about that. You and
Yeah.
like a handful of people at best I've heard mention this in my entire life.
Yeah. Well, just definitely thank you for having me. That's a pleasure to be here. Um, yeah, and this came up for me, to like reach out, and I've been following you for a while, but I went to this summit, to this conference, and it was all about diversity and inclusion. But while being there, I still didn't feel completely included, right? So I felt like they were
Mm.
still missing some diversity.
How
And
so? Like, what did you? Let's talk about your emotions real quick. Like, what were you feeling when? First
well,
of all, why did you go? Let's start with that.
Well, I work for a CRO, and because it's a topic that really has my attention, it has is a passion of mine. There was an opportunity, so I just reached out to my manager, and I knew, a couple people from our CRO were actually going to be attending and actually presenting there. So, I reached out and they said, sure, you can attend. I mean, I'm in Central Florida. This was in Austin, so I had to, take a flight and go all the way there, which complicated things with work, but at the end of the day, I think it was worth it. And I just, was able to get some connections and network
But
with a
that's
couple people.
awesome. Shout out to, I don't know if you want to mention them, but the CRO for saying yes, right away. They don't all do that.
They don't. I'm definitely privileged. And I know we'll get into that, into like how I got into my career and where I am now.
Okay.
But definitely I am privileged of like, having a good group of support, and like my manager is amazing. So but anyway, so I went there, right? And then there was this part where there's like a panel where technically, everybody was represented, right? So we had like a panelist that she was Black, we had a panelist that was Latino or Hispanic, and then we had someone for the LGBT community. And then I was like, you know what? Like, I feel like I want to be up there. I kind of said that in my brain because I'm like, I feel like I'm a merge, and they could be probably even millions of merges, really. This is just mine in particular, what pertains
Hmm.
to me. But, I am Black, but I'm also Hispanic. My mom's from Belize, my dad's from Panama. So I was born actually in Belize, but I left when I was like 5 months. My parents were missionaries, so we literally jumped all around Central America. So I went to school in Spanish, and I just feel like that, right? But here, for example, my first job, just as an example, I remember working for a clinic. I used to work in medical records, and I remember coming to the front desk, and someone who was Hispanic came to me and he's like, alguien que habla español. And I remember just coming up to them and be like, sí, ¿cómo me lo puedo ayudar? And he just looked at me again and said, alguien que habla español. And I'm just like, I'm talking to you Spanish.
Literally talking.
But it wouldn't like click, like they couldn't like record it for some reason just because of my appearance, right? So that
Huh.
happens a lot. It's kind of like, okay, like I'm part of this group and I'm part of this group, but I still feel like I don't belong 100% to each one. So
Hmm.
that's when I was like, oh my, like I wish we had like an Afro Latino community in clinical research, because I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one that feels this way. I'm pretty
It's
sure there's a lot of
huge.
people out
It's
there
huge.
that feel the same way, right? So I don't know. That just brought up my interest. I think there has to be some type of movement in that direction, and hopefully, this brings some more awareness, and hopefully more people out there that feel the same way can get together, and we can,
I could
get
think of
something new
one
out there.
person, Marlene, who can pull that off, and that's you to make that group. So we do it
That's funny.
live on this podcast. No pressure.
No pressure at all. I I tend to be the person that I do a lot. I probably do too much, and I need to like learn to like scale back. Like I'm one of those that I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to do that, and then it's like, and I literally take on so much, and I think I've been like that since I know myself.
Don't
And
worry, I
sometimes
do
I'm
the
like,
same.
calm down.
I do the same. You can't get, I don't think you can ever get over that. You hope you get in the situation where you have so many opportunities coming, you can be pickier. but
Mhm.
I'm still at the point where like I'm not quite there yet. Well, on some things I am, but I still have a hard time saying no. So yeah, you'll never get over it. It's just part of your DNA.
Yeah, I really do. Like, I mean, obviously research is huge. I didn't know what research was back in the day. I mean, my background is physical therapy. I'm actually a physical therapist. That's
Ah,
what I went to school for.
awesome.
Um, in Costa Rica, but as many may feel, identified with that, when you move to the US, you can always work in like your actual field. So,
Mhm.
my life took like a pivot there, and actually I landed in clinical research in 2011. So,
Wow.
um, so I have, that inclination of that and just like helping others and just feeling like, like that you're actually helping. So I think that's huge. And then music is another big thing for me. That's another story. But like I just
What
started.
do you like?
Well, I am actually a songwriter and a singer. So I just released my first album actually
No way.
last month. So that's why I'm like I'm in so stuff.
Do you have a YouTube channel?
I do. It's Lenny Music. So
I gotta
it's
check it
Christian
out.
music. It's Christian music. So it's Spanish and English songs. I actually sing with my daughter and also with my brother. And we have like the first video that came out, and now I'm working on my second one. So that's something else that I'm also
Wow.
working on. So it's kind of like, okay, one more thing, maybe, maybe not, but it's also another passion of mine. So we'll see.
Sure.
We'll see where this
Sure.
leads us. But yeah, so that's kind of what brought us together. I feel in a way, after going to that conference, and I know I'd seen other people interviewed here, on your page, and I was like, I think I would like to do that. And then I just reached out, and then here we are.
Thank you. Thank
Here
you.
we
Yeah,
are.
so it's amazing to be able to have you on, and because I mean, I took a look at your LinkedIn profile when you reached out to me. I was like, wow, feasibility, um, regional feasibility. What's the actual title?
Regional feasibility manager, well, network manager. It's just
That's a whole niche of
yeah,
research that like so many, I mean, site owner, or I'm a site owner. If you
correct.
get like 20 site owners on this Zoom and one feasibility manager, they're all gonna be approaching you like they're gonna be best friends with you.
I know.
Uh,
That's what happened at the summit. It was funny. I wasn't going, I wasn't planning to go because it wasn't originally for me to go, but at the end they gave me the opportunity. So I didn't have like business cards, right? Because we're all remote, so we all work all over. So I don't really have to be in front of sites or people. So I didn't have one. So it was funny. Everybody would take like pictures of my badge, and now like LinkedIn, everybody like messages me because when you hear feasibility, it's like, bling, right? Like your ears are like, oh,
I mean, the site owners, like, let's just be honest, that's why they go to those things. It's
yeah.
really to get studies or to yeah, it's to meet people. That's like the nice thing to say. But what's the outcome? Most of them want studies, more or less, or they want to meet like the people to position themselves for future studies.
Yeah, and I know that you heavily talk about that, right? Networking is huge, right?
Hmm.
Sometimes you can have like million degrees, but literally if you reach the right people, you're set, right? So definitely, I get it. And I love talking. Like I could talk forever to people. So
It's
it made it
perfect
work.
podcast.
It's just kind of like how do you like in my position, for example, I'm getting emails after emails either in my inbox or like on my LinkedIn because of this meeting, but sometimes I just can't get fast enough to them, right? Even though I kind
Mm.
of want to help. Like, for example, I was able to meet this one person that works in Argentina. And like, again, like my passion is Latinos, my passion is just, Hispanics in general. And I feel that's one part that's not in feasibility, is not really reached as much. Cause like normally when I have like my list of countries that we're picking when they come like in the pre-award space, and then I work mainly post-award, you see like the same countries for Latin America, right? All the big ones, Argentina, you have Brazil, you have Mexico, you have Peru, but like there's these all smaller countries where I'm coming from, right? Because I'm mainly from Central America.
Costa Rica,
You
Panama, yeah,
barely see that.
Belize, yeah,
Yeah, like you barely see those countries. And like again,
Dominican
going back to
Republic. You almost never see that, right?
no, and going back to diversity, right? Like going back to the same thing. It's like that's also a part of diversity because even though we're all Latinos or Hispanics in a way, it's still different. So like a way how a drug could react probably to someone in Panama might be a little bit different than someone in Argentina. So
So
I
someone
feel that,
who's like familiar, way more familiar than I am with South America and Central America,
uh,
I would my assumption is that like those countries like Colombia, Mexico, Argentina, they're more established. Like they have more of an established infrastructure for, let's say, medicine, right? And
yeah.
some of the other countries may not. Is that the only problem, or are there like more subtle things of why they're not using those countries for studies?
I don't know. I know, like for us particularly, there's no presence probably of anyone from our CRO there. So like all the regulatory part also makes a huge difference. Because for example, and I know we're jumping all around, but like in my case, right? Like I went to school in Costa Rica. That's where I got my physical therapy degree from. But is there anybody in my company that works in Costa Rica? No. From Costa Rica. There's other countries in Latin America, but we don't get to there because there's no presence, like no regulatory presence, anything like that. So I think little things like that also may play a part. And also another thing, because they're smaller countries and probably their medicine is not as advanced, and all that is kind of like, okay, how many doctors really practice clinical research in those countries? But then again, it's about like teaching them about these things, right? So I kind of wish like we would have some type of field coordinator or something like that could go and like educate these countries. Because the other day I saw Panama and I was like, oh my god, I felt super excited. I mean, not that
Yeah,
I know any doctor there, but still, I just thought it was super cool that actually Panama came up in like a possible feasibility for a study. But again, those are the issues. When I lived in Central America, I was in medical field and I never heard about clinical research. I had no idea what it was.
hmm,
So, I think those are little things that could be better with time. It just takes who's gonna really like want to spend, I guess, the money in a way or another to kind of like get that to the
it's
point where it
money.
needs to
It's
be.
money and it's
But
time. I think the
of
time is
course,
first. Like starting with the group. I
yeah,
mean, something you should consider. I know you can't say no to projects, but that's one that you might want to consider. If you're so passionate about it, like that's a great sign. That's something you should do because
I know.
like I said, I think maybe only three other people other than you, and maybe in one of those instances, one of those three was you. Again, I don't even remember honestly, Marlene, but that's awesome. So we're gonna do everybody subscribe to the Latinos in Clinical Research. We'll do an interview in Spanish with Marlene. I might be on it just to practice a little, but yeah, I'm not like I probably converse like a 6-year-old in Spanish, but I'm getting better. Trying to
Like my
graduate to
daughter,
7-year-old.
like
Yeah,
my
like your
poor daughter.
daughter.
Yeah, she's 8 and she's just like her Spanish. I'm like, Mamita, you need to do like how good it is for you to speak Spanish. Like you have no idea. Like when I first started in the CRO world, I used to cover Latin America, right? And now my position, I cover the entire Americas. So actually I mean, I don't know Portuguese that well, but that's what we speak, right? Spanish, Portuguese, and English, basically. And it just opens up more doors too. So there you go. And you have to
Amazing.
keep refining it,
So
refining it.
let's talk about how you got in your role. So your first clinical research role. So you immigrated to the United States after you were a physical therapist. Hats off to you. My parents immigrated here when I was 3, so I'm privileged in the sense that I don't think I would have immigrated. I'm gonna be honest with you. Like I don't think I would have done that. So I'm privileged in that sense because they did it for me, and they were both physical therapists. Actually, they're foreign
Really
doctors. Physical therapists in the U.S. was their first jobs, and my
love it.
dad later passed his ECFMGs and got his license here. But that was late. I was in finishing high school already, and my mom continued as a physical therapist. But so, congrats to you for doing that. That tells me a lot about you. What was your plan when you moved here?
So originally, I mean, I graduated college around like 2005 as a physical therapist. But when I lived in Costa Rica, if I could tell you, probably like from our entire group of like 45, if 5 of us actually worked in the area was a lot. So there was just not a lot of work there. It's just a lot more complicated. So because I was a US resident due to like my parents and all that, but we still lived over there. We had to come in every 6 months. Probably someone might understand that lingo, but because I had to come in every 6 months, it became kind of expensive, right, for it to like be traveling all the time. So since I was done with school, I was barely working. I used to work with kids with cerebral palsy. That's what I did. I used to go to their houses, and I did, a couple things here and there, but it wasn't like substantial work. So they're like, why don't you just go to the US? Because, you're done. Your brother's still going to school. My parents were still working, in the missionary field. So I'm like, okay, fine. It was super hard because completely different culture. Even though I came to the US regularly, it was still not the same to say, okay, I'm going to go and actually live in the US. I was privileged because I actually got a job directly. Like I came literally with a job, right? So I used to work in medical records,
Mm.
literally just pulling charts, scanning, looking at labs, all that, and then helping like in a front desk.
Before EMRs.
Before you correct. We still have charts, like walls filled with charts with labels. So, anyways, we don't need to go back to that. But then I moved to another clinic, working same thing front desk, and we had like a satellite office where I was kind of like the manager of that satellite office, and they started doing research. So that one of the doctors in that clinic started doing clinical research. So we had a coordinator in that small office where I used to go every morning because we used to draw blood there, right? I used to be like the one in the front desk, blah, blah, blah. So everything started literally reviewing charts, looking for A1Cs. That was the only thing because we had a diabetes trial. So that's how the coordinator told me, hey, you're in the front desk. Hey, can you help me? We have this. I had no clue what clinical research was.
Yeah, no
That's
idea. You
how
were
it all,
pre-screening. You were a
I was,
pre-screening patient.
I was literally pre-screening. So this coordinator tells me, I think you would be a good coordinator. Like she just told me this out of the blue. And I'm just like, okay. So she told me, hey, you should probably just go try to get GCP training, I get IATA training. Like she told me like all this like general information. And there I went, like a little soldier, and actually did that because I wasn't working in PT, right? Like I already had that taken out of the way
Who is
because
this person? Do you remember her name?
her name is Amy. I can't remember her last name right now, but her name is Amy. If she looks at this, shout
Maybe
out to
she'll
Amy.
watch. Let's go,
Because
Amy.
literally
Thank
that was
you.
like the segue to it. And I still don't remember to this day how my resume got to this one clinic they used to call Compass Research. They're no longer
Huh.
around. But I started in recruitment on the phones, literally just calling patients. Hey, do you want to participate? I used to have a folder filled with protocol, basically INEs. That's the only thing that we used to look at, highlighting all the, inclusion, exclusion criteria. And I would just be calling these, patients or subjects, and then I'll bring them into the clinic. So I did that probably like maybe 9 months or so.
Hmm.
But because I had experience with patients, because they knew that I was a physical therapist and I was like missing that patient interaction, they're like, hey, would you like to go down to the clinic? And I'm like,
Mm.
sure. So, okay.
Well, hold on
Go ahead.
though. Okay, so this pre-screening thing. Okay, I think this is going to be a good topic too to just double click on a little bit. But I have to pre-screen like in an hour. I'm going to the office. That's why we
Mhm.
tried to move the interview. Thank you so much for making it earlier. So, do you notice? I'm assuming, okay,
Mhm.
correct me if I'm wrong, that you were pre-screening English and Spanish, or was it English only, or how? Like, what were you doing?
Well, there was literally only English in
Oh,
my
only
in my
English.
house.
Okay,
Yeah, because there was no Spanish speaking PI per se or doctors at that clinic.
okay.
So like I at that point I was really, and we didn't only had one coordinator,
Hmm.
right? So she wasn't Spanish speaking, so we only did English, right? You had to
Yeah.
know
Okay.
English. I know like, and I even though like the other clinic that I moved to, like all the consents were only in English. So
I
that was
see.
always a big thing where we were like, hey, we have a doctor that speaks Spanish, and this is a second clinic. I have coordinator that speak like, why don't we do this? Like, why don't we tap
Hmm.
into this?
Hmm.
But
That's
yeah.
it. 'Cause the reason I asked was because here in Yuma, I moved to Yuma, Arizona. It's a border town. We're on the border of Arizona, California, and Mexico, like right where those three states and countries meet.
Mhm.
Um, it's very tough, and we have Spanish speaking staff and providers Spanish speaking. It's very tough to get a native Spanish speaker, like so no English, interested in participating in research. They think
Mhm.
they tend to be more hesitant to do it. They usually think And probably because most of them here come from Mexico and over there, who knows, like not every provider's good, right? They're just
Mhm.
do whatever they feel like sometimes from what I understand. So they're hesitant. So I was curious to get your take on that as well. But um
Yeah, and I think how you have to like word it more is like, okay, like the free care part, like the free care part is like, hey, if you don't have insurance, you can get some labs for free, stuff
yeah.
like that. Because I think a lot of them, their mentality is like, oh, I'm just being a guinea pig. I'm just,
Yeah.
it's kind of like that's their mentality. It's really hard to like break that. But I get it. It's because of education. Like I'm telling you,
Mhm.
I had no clue what clinical research was. Right. So like all these people have no clue what it is. So it's kind of you just tell them that and it's like, like, you have two people, those that are like, I'm not sure, or those that I'm like, I need the money, let me do it,
Yeah.
type of thing.
Yeah.
But it's like finding like that genuine person that really understands what clinical research is and actually wants to make an impact and a difference for many to come. I don't think it's that common
It's tough.
for
It's
Latinos
tough.
and Hispanics in general. Yeah.
It's tough. Yeah, I was just curious. Sorry to interrupt. So you went from
Oh, no, you're
pre-screening
welcome.
to coordinating.
So, well, yeah, so like I was, phone pre-screener and recruitment, we called it. And I came down to the clinic. I was going to be like a research assistant. So basically, I was going to be the one pulling charts and just like making runs for the coordinators. But that lasted 1 week because one of the coordinators left and they're like, hey, they're leaving. Do you want a coordinator position? I said, of course, yes.
Sounds like
So,
2022 all over again.
so well, that was probably like 2012, 2013, somewhere around there.
Wow.
So
Okay.
um, anyway, so that's how I got in, and I mean, my first study was like a Parkinson's study, like it's nothing like super easy, like this neurology trial. But anyway, so from there, it's where I'm now. I mean, I did do a lot of pre-screen. I think that was one of my favorite positions at the site level. To be honest, everybody had to come through me, and I loved it. I used to love
Mm.
pre-screening. Um, but then I got into the CRO world in feasibility and the side ID. So that's what I've been doing since I've worked for this, side of town, which I call it kind of like the flipping the coin.
So
But
you
it
went
yeah,
from patient like a pre-screener without even knowing it to basically patient recruiter to research assistant to pre-screening. Did you ever go coordinate? I thought I saw on your LinkedIn
yep. So I
coordinator,
was
full court.
coordinator. Yeah. So
Okay.
that's why when I said like I literally only did like one week of being an assistant and then I would
Mm.
became a coordinator. And then while I was a coordinator, then I kind of moved back to pre-screening. I was like an office director, like a site lead. I was basically the only one at this one other site and the doctor and a nurse. So
Mm-hmm.
I had to like that's when I actually got my CCRP because I think I was super immersed like in every single thing that I literally was able to grasp everything because I had to do like 1792 I had to do like spin my own blood like shit. It was crazy because it was literally only me and then the PI. So I had to like create source. It was a
Sounds
lot.
like me right now. Well, I have a few helpers, but yeah, basically. So your
Yeah,
story is interesting because you did go the site route, like I tell
it did.
almost
Yeah.
everybody to do, if you can. And then you got in as a senior site access specialist. You basically got into feasibility,
Yeah.
and you've stayed there. Like most people, they think, well, I want to be a CRA. Like, why did that not happen for you? Did you not pursue that, or did you just love feasibility so much?
No, so I think when I was a coordinator, when I was at the site level, I think my first way of thinking was to be a monitor, right? Like go to the CRA route. Like
Like
that's what the
everyone.
first thing you're like, oh, you talk to the monitors, right? Like you have to talk to them. But I already had my daughter, and I think it was going to be very complicated. I mean, at the moment I was married, but I don't think my ex-husband would have been like, oh yeah, let me just stay home and like, it's just a lot of traveling. And I remember
Hmm.
talking to one of the monitors, and she's like, oh yeah, I'm the one that travels, and my husband stays home. I'm like, I don't think that's going to work for us. But so
It's
I feel
brutal.
that it's hard. So I feel like that was kind of like my biggest like stopper limitant in a way. Is just I knew that was just not gonna fit for my family and it was just gonna not fit for me. So but I knew I did want to go to the CRO side and I was able to get into feasibility and I just think feasibility is just so critical and so important for every single study. It's literally the base for everything. And then just having that part where I used to work with Central America and South America, I loved because I had to talk to these sites, in Spanish, and it just kind of like just sparked that like really good part that I love, right?
The
So I
coordinators.
think, yeah, so it kind of worked for me, and then I always wanted to be a line manager. I knew that that was one of the things that I knew, just because I'm such a big people person, and I felt like throughout my career, throughout my life, I didn't have the best managers per se. So I
Okay.
always said I want to be like what I didn't receive. I mean, I could tell you probably a handful that I used to, that I'm actually could say that they were amazing. But I always had that in the back of my brain, but I never had like the experience to be, a line manager, and that just happened not too long ago in December, and that's where I say that the CRO that I work for was amazing because I started there in July, and I got promoted ending of November. My full
Wow.
team started in January. So now I have 14 direct reports. So it's a pretty big team that I have.
Wow.
And I'm loving, literally
Are
loving it.
they a mixture of CRAs and feasibility analysts, or uh, wh-
So they're all called, we have it a different name. They're called site feasibility liaisons for the company that I work for. But basically, my team are the ones calling the sites and trying to getting CDAs and getting, the
mm,
feasibility questionnaires completed.
I
So
love
we're
you
just
guys.
basically, yeah, you're, I'm the one that every site wants to like contact. So it's
Yeah,
literally,
please call me.
so it's kind of like I'm basically over the liaison. So I'm basically over them, just making sure that they're doing everything because I used to do that, right? So I feel like it works full circle. Also because I worked at the site level, I kind of have that empathy, right? I could understand like the site, and like sometimes like you're like filled with work, and you were like like USA is almost on every single study, right? So it's kind of like some sites are like, there we go again, another email from you. You have both, just like either small research sites that are like, yes, we want work, or we have others that are like, oh, I'm tired of seeing, another opportunity.
Mm,
So I think because I worked at the site level, it just helped me to kind of see it full circle. So I'm just very thankful, obviously, that
that's
I first
awesome.
started in recruitment, which is kind of crazy, and now I'm like working here and doing this. But
I didn't even realize that. I just I assumed, and I've been doing this 17 years. I just assumed line managers are only for CRAs. I had no idea.
yeah,
You had a line manager for other roles at the CRO level.
yeah. Oh no,
Kind
there
of
is.
amazing.
There is. I mean, they need something, someone to
So why
lead
don't more
them in
people
the
go
way.
feasibility? Like, why is it not a household name like a CRA? I
I
never
don't.
have anyone reach out and say, I want to be a feasibility
I know.
specialist, Dan.
I know. It's
Nobody.
not very common, and I know like that's one thing. Like I haven't heard it in any of your podcasts, right? I don't think you have had anybody really doing that,
No.
right?
I've talked about it, but just briefly, not like that it's a career
That's the
option.
thing. Yeah. We actually have like my position when I first started in July, I used to be a feasibility lead, which is basically reviewing all the data, right? So we have the ones that call the sites, right, to actually get the CDAs, get the feasibility questionnaires, and then we have the other team that actually has to do like the analytics of the data. So that's what I used to do before. That's what I came in at. So I used to work sponsor facing, right? Because I used to have to be presenting to the sponsor, hey, from these sites, pick this one and this one because this one gave me better response, blah, blah, blah. But
So
now I'm
you basically
actually,
like when you get those surveys, you're like, all right, everybody's puts it between 10 to 20 patients, and this site put 200. So you call that site and say, what's going on? Is this
oh
number
no,
real?
because yeah, those are outliers. Like we can't do that. Like, I mean, we kind of see it all, right? So before I give them a report, we kind of have like a handful already because we kind of could gauge where it's going. The pre-award team normally gives you like a potential scenario of how many, like let's say how many subjects each site can probably recruit. But we do have those sites where we're like, okay, everybody's
uh,
saying they can recruit 10 and you're saying you can recruit 50. I don't think so. Like this company where I work for, we don't do this, but another I work with, we actually reduced the amount of the response. So we would actually take it like an absolute response. So if you even told us 10, we would actually count like if you're only giving us 5.
I knew
Just
you
because
guys did
we're
that. I knew it. I
some
knew
of
it.
them, mine, not everybody does, but some CROs do because
Mhm.
it happens, and then you're telling the sponsor, right? Oh yeah, I'm giving you 10, and then at the end of the day, you only gave me 3.
Right,
It's really
right.
messed up, and then you have to go back from
Every
scratch.
site does it. Look, I'm gonna tell you a story. Like I had 6 years ago when I had another site. The site's still going on actually, but
Mhm,
we were doing a neurology study, psychiatry, and we knew the sponsor fairly well. Like it was another study from them. They liked us, so they gave us this other study,
mhm,
and they sent a new CRA to do our site selection visit. So I don't even know what we put on the feasibility survey, or maybe we didn't do one because we worked with them before. So the CRA, yeah, she asked during the thing, like, how many patients can you enroll? And we said something like 8. We said a very conservative number.
okay.
And she went back, she was new, and we almost didn't get the study because the sponsor said, "Well, ask the site like how many patients they actually can get," and we were telling them like this is the real number. You don't
Yeah.
have to like devalue it. This is what it is. But so many sites were embellishing, like doubling that
Mm,
number. We almost didn't get the study. If it wasn't for the sponsor really pushing for us to have it, we wouldn't have gotten it.
yeah, it's true. I mean, but it's like a double sword for some reason. Like I feel because you have those sites where and we have our database, right? So we have certain sites that we're going to go to multiple times because we have metrics of what's happened historically.
Mhm.
And so if we have good performers, we're going to go back to those sites. That's just a given fact. Obviously, there's certain sponsors like this one that you're talking about that had your site as like a top site that said, I'm going with them regardless of what their numbers are. And that happens to us too. Sometimes they're just like, we want this site. We don't care what they answer. Or sometimes they even skip the feasibility questionnaire, right? Because they're like,
Oh,
we know we're having them in our trial, right? So, like, you have that too. But you just have to be very careful because you don't want to like either give like a really low number or be like completely crazy. But sometimes you have no clue what that really is,
I
right? So it's
know.
kind of like you can't really read what we're seeing on the other side. You're just kind of like blindly like trying to answer the best that you can, and that's
You
what
know
you have.
what? This is such a complicated topic. I mean, we can go an hour just on this because, and we'll probably have you on again because this is gonna be too good. But the problem, I do these feasibility myself, like from the
Mhm.
site perspective.
Yeah.
The problem with these, and I genuinely like, I'm in a site right now. I don't have to embellish. They're the biggest provider in Yuma. They've got like 12 providers working for them. We have database for most
Okay.
things. So I'm looking at a synopsis, but the I don't think the synopsis, the way they're written, it doesn't give you like a Cliff Notes version of the actual difficulty of the study. You
Yeah.
know, it gives you a Cliff Notes of like a summary of the study, but until
Mhm.
you actually screen and randomize, you have no idea like just how complex or how difficult that study is going to be, even with the inclusion exclusion criteria. It's until you actually do it that you see like, whoa. You know, I have one study. I'm like, I don't think we're going to be able to randomize anybody, and I think I put like 10 on the survey.
Oh boy.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I know, and I think it goes in stages, right? Because you get normally like the synopsis, then you get the full protocol, then you actually have real life, right?
yeah.
So it's kind of like, okay, you see the schedule of events, you see like how this needs to be, what's going to be happening,
Mm.
but especially if it's like a rare disease or if it's like a recent, and I feel like, and I think you've seen that, like I feel like as years go by, these protocols are more and more complicated.
Yeah.
They just don't make it very straightforward. It's like I just want like an easy study. I just I hear that all the time, and it's just like yeah, I don't think those are there anymore.
They
Like
don't exist. The
there are no
sponsor want their
2 hour.
money. They want
There's no
ROI on the money.
Yeah, there's no 2 hour visits anymore, right? Like if these take like forever to like screen, especially like a screening and randomization visit, they take forever. But it's tricky. It's really like a hit or miss. I feel like you have to be this very depending on the indication, right? If you are like a very specialized doctor, then you know that you're probably going to have that amount of patients that come through your clinic. But if
Right.
it's just like a general clinical research center, a lot of the times you don't know, right? And I mean, sometimes you go and like do some type of like ad campaign and you still you only get like one response from that too. So it's kind of like,
Yeah.
okay, that didn't um so it's also for the site to be very careful, I think, to what they say yes to. Um if you get to that point where you could be picky, right? So if you're starting, it's kind of like, okay, I'm going to basically
That was the
take
first
almost
study we
everything.
got at this site, and then that's the hardest study maybe I've ever had
Oh boy.
as far as like moving pieces. But we had really no way of knowing. Like, I know you're supposed to like do the survey, then they're supposed to do the site selection visit and ask, confirm your numbers,
Yeah.
and then SIV too. You confirm again. Um, the the reality is like the sites don't really learn the study, the nuts and bolts, until they actually start seeing patients.
Hmm.
Like they
Yeah,
don't
you
they
don't have
don't
the
learn
time.
it that way. Yeah.
You don't have the time to like just sit down and literally immerse in it, because
Mhm.
like I remember when I was a coordinator, you would get assigned a particular study, you would print all these pages and like literally start highlighting like crazy and just trying to make sure like it made sense. But then you would look at like one visit and be like, oh my God, did I miss this step? Or like, what else did I have to get done here? Because again, the studies are more and more complicated, right? So it's kind of like, and then like, I feel like all the newer coordinators tend to have difficulties with that too, right? Because
Yep.
like, how do you get trained? But like, I know that you have like that school and all that, so that kind of
Mhm.
helps. But until you actually do it, like you said, it's
There's no substitute for
not gonna
just
be.
doing it. I
Yeah.
think that's the problem with the industry and with feasibility in general. But I mean, sites will say, "Oh yeah, we've analyzed this survey
Mhm.
and this is our best." They don't. They just put numbers that based on their database without really looking at inclusion exclusion criteria. They might look at it like a few things, but not all of it.
Yeah, yeah. And it's just trying to change that mentality. But then again, having
Yeah.
a feasibility department at the site level too, right? Like you said, you're wearing like multiple hats. So like you have to
Hmm.
do a lot of things. Like I remember when I was like that site director, literally I was the only one. It was only me and the doctor. I mean, I had to do the feasibilities too. So it's kind of like, okay, I'm gonna do the best I can, but I don't know all of it, right? So I'm just gonna give you, the best information that I'm able to get, and just hope that I'm gonna be selected for that particular
Yeah.
trial. But feasibility is it's good. And you definitely have to have the right sites, because at the end of the day, some studies come back to us, right? Just because the sites, let's say we put in 10 sites and then from those 10 sites, only three are producing, So sometimes the sponsor goes back to you and say, hey, I need more sites now. And then you have to go all over again. So you really want to
Rescue sites.
avoid that. You want to avoid that because, yeah, we just don't like that. But
Rescue
anyway,
sites are tough. Yeah, we're a
yeah.
rescue site on two studies right now. Wow. Okay, so I think our next interview is just basically about dissecting this feasibility process. But like maybe we can end this one with what people can do if they really want feasibility. I think a lot of people watching, listening, never heard of this as a career, and it's not like CRA is the only job at these CROs. There's a lot of other
There's a
roles.
lot. There's a lot of jobs. I mean, I I think a lot of thing is just like transferable skills, right? Like, because this a lot of this is a lot of customer service. If you look at it that way, right? At least for the ones that are like calling these sites, you just have to be very like personable and very attention to detail. Because obviously you're going to be calling not for just one protocol, but you normally my direct reports they normally have around 5 studies that they're going to be working on at the same time. So I think someone that's just very attention to detail that likes to be on the phone. That's a big thing I always ask on my interviews, like when I'm trying to hire people, are you okay being on the phone 50% of the time? Because you literally, and I tell you know my people, like we're like kind of like Inspector Gadget. I feel like because sometimes like you don't have the right phone numbers to get to these people, or you
Mm,
don't have the right person that's actually the one that has to complete the feasibility questionnaires. Sometimes I just have the doctor, and the PIs really don't always get to their emails on time. So it's kind of like, like how am I going to get that to be completed? So I feel like someone that's literally like passionate about being on the phone and just like actually not being scared of doing that and actually like
mm.
immersing themselves in that is good. Actually, I think it's a great segue from being at the site level to jump into the CRO world if they actually want to do that. Um, because they look at INEs, right? Like when you're like a coordinator, for example, you're looking at like inclusion exclusion. That's like a big thing that we look at when we are doing this. Um, so it's just, if you look at it, apply. Sometimes maybe I didn't even think I would be the right person for the position, but I still applied anyway. I feel we have this bad misconception of like I have to be like super perfect in order for me to apply for a job, right? Nobody is perfect. We're always learning. There's always room for you to grow and to like actually learn. I mean, I'm learning every day. There's not everything I know. I mean, I'm a manager to 14 people, and there's like, okay, I don't know that. I'll get back to you. I'll go and research it. Um, so I think just being like very transparent, right, with that, and I think if they see like your enthusiasm that actually transpasses, like maybe now in this world is a lot of them is like just virtual, but I think they'll see that in you and like just those transferable skills, just kind of like highlight them when you're going to an interview and just kind of being like, hey, I've done this. For us, we love taking people in our department that are at the site level because they're able to see both sides of the coin. So for me, like I see a huge value in hiring people that actually have been at the site level. So I think it's another avenue to look at. I mean, like you said, research is huge. There's a lot of departments, not only
Mhm.
feasibility, not only being a CRA, and even in-house CRAs too, right? I think that's something else that could happen and that could work. Before this department existed, for us, in-house CRAs were doing this job.
Right. Right.
But they're divided, right? Because they don't only work with like feasibility, they also work with like study startup, for example. So it's kind of like,
Mhm.
okay, how am I gonna split my work like doing this, but I also have to get the sites up and running and get all the docs and up in a row. So having just feasibility and just working directly in feasibility is a lot better because you have again full grasp of your role and you actually are more effective and actually have the time to spend with the sites in general. So
I think it's a
I would,
good career for somebody, like, if they wanna get their foot in the door at a
yeah.
CRO,
Hmm.
and you guys are just as in demand as, like, a CRA, right? I mean, you guys understaffed, I'm guessing, as well as everyone else?
Yeah, and that's and obviously each CRO calls it differently, and that's the tricky part,
Yeah.
right? So it's kind of like I know other CROs call it only like site ID, site identification, because a lot of CROs feasibility is more like the pre-award side, and then site identification is the post-award side. So it's kind of like digging. I feel like not only going by the title, right? Like, okay, CRA is
Yeah.
pretty common. That's pretty easy to just find, okay, CRA is probably the same thing all over. But like for feasibility and for site ID, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit trickier. So literally like going in and like reading the description of like what they're looking for,
Yeah.
right? Because for me,
It's
site
what
feasibility
separates
liaison.
I think it's what separates the good from the great, and ultimately, though, those who succeed from those who don't. I just talked to someone on Instagram earlier today related to this. So none of they're complaining that these jobs are not standardized across all companies, and we're like,
Mhm.
well, what are you gonna do? Of course it'd be better, but what can we do? That's not the reality we live in. So I told them just search clinical research on these job boards, right, and see everything that comes up. You're gonna learn if you do just that. You're gonna learn like 20 new job titles that you've
You will.
never thought of googling before.
Mhm. That's so true. I mean, you have to be like more broad, right? Like with your search, even with other things. Like think the broader you are, the more information you could probably get. So yeah, that's like a great way. Literally, clinical research or just feasibility if you're literally working and you want to do
Mhm.
that, or site identification. That's just going to be something that you could probably like look up and hopefully find that because every single CRO has a department for feasibility that has to be done.
Yeah, it's got to get
So
done.
yeah, so there's definitely openings out there, and we need people with the side experience too. So I think if that's a segue, maybe you could move into CRA after doing this. That could happen too.
I
Or the
think
way
so.
around. Like I think I was going to mention that like when I used to work in the analytics side, we actually had a CRA. Well, we have a former CRA that just got tired of traveling. And she works now in feasibility. She does like the analytics side, and she still had to learn, even though she had been a CRA for years. But it's still like a different area of research that you probably, she probably wasn't as aware about, but you
Mhm.
have to do it because you still at the end of the day, like the base is the same, right? So just maybe some terminology will change, and at the end of the day, you could still study and like try to get help from your peers or have like a mentor or a buddy. Like I'm huge about that, like pairing people up that way, they could get like cross knowledge from one from the other. So I encourage if that's something that called someone's attention from today's podcast that they could look into it and maybe they'll be working with me. Who knows?
Thank you, Marlene. I really appreciate it. We'll definitely have to do a part two after the Latinos in clinical research one. I really hope you think about putting that group together, uh, Afro Latinos in clinical research. I think I think it's a great idea, and obviously there's a need for it. And I really appreciate you coming on this podcast today. And we'll have your LinkedIn profile underneath the video and in the show notes if you're listening. So everybody go connect. And Marlene is a great person to get to know. Thank you again so much for coming on.
You are welcome. Thanks for having me. And yeah, we'll be looking forward to part two at some point.
Soon, soon. Stay tuned, everybody. Talk to y'all later. Bye bye.
Bye bye.